Meanwhile, NATO looks set to approve a plan to dramatically increase defense spending. If the proposal by the alliance's chief, Mark Rutte, is agreed, each member country will spend 5% of GDP on defense. Currently, the target is 2%. Rutte's plan still has to be signed off at a NATO summit in June, but it got a big boost at meetings of NATO ministers in Turkey today when Germany said it was ready to commit.
German Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul arrived in Antalya with a clear message, a message that came as a surprise for some here. During their meeting, Wadephul told US Secretary of State Marco Rubio Germany fully supports America's demand to massively ramp up defense spending across the NATO alliance. He also made clear that Berlin is willing to take on a leadership role in Europe and convince other allies to follow their example.
We need to look at the result. The result is indeed the 5% goal that President Trump has called for, which he considers necessary. We're following him there. We see this as a clear commitment by the United States of America to Article 5. NATO stands closely together.
The announcement was a big win for NATO chief Mark Rutte, who has been for months now rallying allies behind his new plan. A plan to spend 3.5% of national GDP directly on defense and an additional 1.5% on security infrastructure. In Germany's case, such investments would amount to more than 150 billion euros on defense. A lot of money. But NATO chief Mark Rutte made it clear here that this is necessary for Europe's own security and to keep the US within the alliance.
We know we will need greater investment in our core military requirements, as well as additional broader defense-related investments, including infrastructure and including resilience.
Allies are still negotiating the exact terms of the plan and what a realistic time frame would be to achieve it. But Rutte's plan seems to have broad support. Another topic in Antalya was Washington's and Kiev's efforts to bring Russia to the negotiating table to end the war in Ukraine, with ministers demanding an immediate and lasting ceasefire.
Putin's strategy doesn't change. He looks for distraction, deceive, and also the delay of any proper process for the peace. We are strongly supporting the position of Ukraine, of US, and of our European allies to go for the ceasefire for at least 30 days.
Turkey, the host of the NATO meeting and the talks between Russia and Ukraine, said it was cautiously optimistic that those talks could be an important step towards peace.
Let's talk about what all that means with Olaf Böhnke. He's the Germany director of Rasmussen Global. That's a consultancy firm founded by former NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen. Olaf, welcome back to DW. It's great to have you on the show. Now, the German foreign minister's announcement to raise defense spending to 5% of the country's GDP has caused quite a stir back home. Is he serious about this?
Frankly speaking, no. So I would say this is more political theater than fiscal reality. So you could call it a bluff, but I think it's a bluff which could work, and not just for the Europeans, but also for the US. So, I mean, remember, so in 2014, the NATO member states actually committed themselves to 2%. So 2025 will be the first year since then that all member states actually really accomplished that number. So therefore, if the Europeans united can send the message to Washington, we are committed to the 5%. So Trump can be the winner. So he made a deal, he made the European move, and everyone knows that will take at least a decade to get close to it. And in all fairness, so even the US, as the biggest contributor, actually allocates at the moment 3.4% of its GDP for defense. So therefore, everyone is very, very far away from the 5%.
And it also looks like the head of NATO is somewhat broadening the definition of what defense spending actually means, right? Essentially, I'm assuming to get around U.S. demands. Does he expect that to go unnoticed by Washington? Does Washington know and want to go along because they're actually also very far off the 5%? What is this about?
No, I think it's a smart way to check the number in theory and on paper. But so of course, in a way, so the entire Europe has an infrastructure problem. So in Germany in particular, so we have this longish conversations here about broken bridges and streets and everything. So therefore, yeah. So we had a similar attempt when the 2% goal was implemented. Then Germany tried to aim for 3% and said, but 1% should be for foreign aid. So now we are in a more hardcore the conversations, or in terms of, okay, we're not talking about foreign aid because we know the Trump administration is not interested in that, but they could be convinced maybe to accept for the time being the 5% in this kind of new calculus.
The Trump administration has said plenty of times that they want European countries to look after their own defense. But after everything you've just said, it really seems like still much of what they do regarding this defense is to appease Washington, essentially. Will that ever change?
No, exactly. This is so the elephant in the room is not the 5% target. It is actually the US. So it's the US commitment to NATO and to European security. So in a way, this joint message from Rutte, from Wadefuhl, and others will join in the next days and weeks ahead of the NATO summit in Den Haag is, please, America, don't leave us. So because everyone knows the NATO actually will be a hollow shell actually without the US. So defense is about credibility and capabilities, and only the US involvement makes NATO still a credible security ally. So in this regard, so strengthening European defense is essential for the Europeans, and more commitment in material, but also in other ways actually is the one message I think Europe wants to send to Trump, and it could work.
Where do you see NATO going in the next 3 years, especially in terms of its dependence on the US?
I mean, that depends actually on two things. The one is so who will win the next US elections? And it might already start next autumn with the midterm elections in the US. So in case Trump will lose both or at least one of the two houses, so he has a full majority at the moment, he rules the Senate and the Congress. So if he's losing the majority in Parliament, then maybe this checks and balances systems of the US with a strong Congress might return to reality, and then it is much more complicated for him. The other one is, as I said, the European commitments, or if the Europeans will really spend over the next years significant more money into their own defense, and not just to keep the US happy, but for their very own interest, because Russia is not stopping its aggression on the eastern border. That I think these are the two crucial questions which answers actually will answer. So where NATO will be in 4 years.
Interesting times ahead. Thank you. That was Olaf Böhnke of Rasmussen Global. Always great to speak to you.
Thank you.
Let's bring in DW's Brussels Bureau Chief Alexandra from Nahmen. She's at that NATO meeting in Antalya. Alexandra, what do you make of this news? Germany supporting a vastly increased defense spending target of 5% within NATO. Are you surprised?
Well, I was a bit surprised. Of course, we all knew that the German government was determined to massively increase defense spending. But only last week, when the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz visited NATO headquarters in Brussels, he did not want to commit to any precise, concrete number. So to hear this clear commitment to the 5% of GDP on defense today from his foreign minister was a bit surprising, and to hear that Germany is fully supportive of Donald Trump's demands, that they want to take on a leadership role in Europe, that they want other allies to follow their example, that was quite something. However, we also have to add that it's not done deal yet, because the commitment is there, but it's still needed for the German coalition to have a formal decision on that number in the future, when they will be putting together a new budget for the government.
Now, NATO Chief Mark Rutte says this meeting is all about ramping up defense spending, especially in Europe. Does Germany's announcement suggests this meeting is going well for Rutte so far.
Well, I think that this meeting went very well for Mark Rutte. To hear that from Germany, it was a big success for him. And I had a chance to ask the same question to the French foreign minister. And he also said that France as well is supporting the plan to spend 5% of GDP on defense, 3.5% directly on defense, and 1.5% of the GDP on infrastructure. So we are hearing from our sources that there is broad support for Mark Rutte's plan. However, it of course means that would amount to a massive sum of money alone for Germany. That would mean hundreds of billions of euros.
So what will NATO do with this money, Alexandra? This is a massive increase, as you've pointed out. Germany isn't even spending half of that now.
Well, as you know, Terry, because of Russia's war against Ukraine, NATO is considering Russia as a big threat, and that is why they updated their defense plans. They are putting more equipment on their eastern flank. They are deploying more troops there. They have 500,000 of troops at high readiness, and they realize they do not have enough equipment in Europe. For instance, not enough air defense systems to protect Europe, so they want to invest that money in new weapons to produce and buy them. And of course, they are also thinking about investing in necessary infrastructure, in new bridges and roads that would be needed also to transport tanks and other weapon systems.
Alexandra, thank you very much. Our Brussels Bureau Chief, Alexandra von Nahmen, there in Antalya.